Topology just means the study of shape. It turns out arrangements don't vary infinitely. They keep falling into a handful of recognizable configurations. Two groups with a gap, a line, a center with an outlier, a dense pileup. Each one maps to a specific kind of tension, and importantly, each has a defined way it should be read. A named finite taxonomy is something you can actually check for reliability. If the same shape reliably shows up and reliably maps to the same kind of situation, that's a claim you can evaluate. If it doesn't, the taxonomy fails, and I want to know. The first topology, the split. Two separate groups with a clear gap and no card bridging it. This signals unresolved binary tension to forces or states not yet in contact. The most important instruction here is counterintuitive. Do not reconcile the two groups. Read each on its own terms, then turn your attention to the gap itself and ask, what is the distance? What the distance is protecting? The empty space between them is the actual subject. The method treats a gap as a feature to be read, not a problem to be closed. The second topology, the spine. A rough line of evenly spaced points. This signals a sequence in time, cause and effect, or development. A line reads like a timeline. You find the anchor, the point carrying the most weight, and read forward and backward from it to establish direction. It's the closest the method comes to reading a story. And even here, the structure, not your imagination, sets the order. This is the most intuitive topology for beginners. A line is a sequence. The third topology is the satellite. One point far outside an otherwise coherent center. This signals an outside perspective, an overlooked factor, or a self-separated element watching from a distance. The rule is strict. Decode the center completely before you even look at the outlier. Then you ask the one question that makes the satellite powerful. What does this distant point know that the center doesn't? The outlier is treated as a vantage point, not an error. In orbit, not in exile. The outlier is connected, not discarded. That distinction is the whole point. The fourth topology, the collapse. Everything overlapping in one dense pile with no real distance between points. This signals conflation and overload, a breakdown of boundaries where everything affects everything at once. When everything has merged, the method does the opposite of what overload wants. It slows down and separates. You read each point individually, with a deliberate pause between, and you ask, which one doesn't actually belong? You're manually restoring the boundaries the arrangement has lost. Overwhelm feels like everything at once. The method's response is to deliberately unblur it. This is the idea I'd most want you to leave with. In trauma work, The most important material is frequently what the person cannot say. The unspoken thing that organizes everything around it. In geometry, space itself is defined by the gaps between the points. Both are telling you the same thing. Absence has structure. So when you read a layout, the region where nothing landed isn't leftover. It's often the most critical data on the table. You have to be trained to look at it because every instinct pulls your eyes to what is there. Astronomers find planets by the wobble of the unseen mass. Doctors read the negative space on an X-ray. Reading absence is standard practice in serious fields. This just applies the same eye. Here's what makes this defensible. You treat a reading like a hypothesis, and you build in a control. Before you check how anything turns out, you write down explicitly what observable events would prove your reading wrong. If you can't name what failure looks like, you don't have a reading. You have a projection dressed up as one. That single requirement is the line between this and a horoscope, and I hold to it on every layout. Falsifiability is a demarcation between a testable claim and an unfalsifiable one. That's Popper, not me. A horoscope never tells you in advance what would make it wrong. This method requires it every single time. That's the entire difference. The discipline isn't only in the theory. It's in how you're required to practice. The first 10 days, you're forbidden from asking any question at all. You only learn to tell a real signal from a wish. The next 10 days, you compare arrangements across sessions to find what genuinely repeats. Only in the last third do you bring a real question. And even then, a full disconfirmation metric is mandatory every single time. You earn the right to answers by first proving you can observe honestly. The constraints are the interesting part. A method confident in itself doesn't need to forbid questions for 10 days. This one does, because it's more interested in honest observation than in fast answers. Let me pull it together. A point carries a location. Distance measures relationship. A cluster concentrates weight. A void defines the whole field by what it withholds. These four ideas describe both the geometry of a surface and the architecture of an inner life, which is why arrangement can map experience at all. Read the geometry first, and meaning arrives disciplined, grounded in what you recorded, not in what you hoped. That's all intuition is here, made legible. I've used geometry as a lens, not a proof. What I'll defend without hedging is the discipline. Record first, interpret in order, and state in advance what would prove you wrong. Keep the discipline even if you discard the metaphor. The four-word skeleton: point, distance, cluster, and void. Underneath all the geometry, here's what this really is: a disciplined way of paying attention to what we usually overlook: the space, the absence, the thing that didn't appear. I'm not asking you to believe the table is speaking. I'm offering you a rigorous way to listen, and a standard that's honest enough that you'll know if there's nothing there. The dedication says it best. To the unexpressed, the unreachable, and the geometry of what remains. Test the discipline. Keep your dated records, including the failures. Let your own evidence decide. That's the only authority I'd want you to trust anyway. Read the space, not just the objects. I'm Dr. Rivka Edery. I thank you so much for joining me today, and I hope to see you next time. Thank you.